So, good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third episode of this year's masterclass. My name is Sadiq, and I'm from the product support team, and I'm going to be the presenter for today's session. All right, in today's session, we're going to talk about how you can effectively build and implement change management workflows, considering all the sidestep risk involved with adequate governance using the cloud version of ServiceDesk Plus. And before moving into the presentation, as usual, a few housekeeping items. All the attendees will be on mute by default. And if you have any questions during the session, always post your questions on the left-hand side panel of your screen. And we will be having a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where our team will be more than happy to answer all your queries. The entire session is being recorded and you'll be sent with the recording in a couple of days to your registered email addresses. And as usual, if you have any feedback or questions post the session, you can always drop an email to my personal email address, which you currently see on the screen, or you can drop an email to hello@servicedeskplus.com and a team would be more than happy to help you with it. All right, so with that, we're going to move to today's topic. And before moving into the presentation, a quick poll. So how does your organization approach change management? Does your organization use any unique workflows for different types of changes? For example, like standard change, normal change, and emergency changes? Or do you use a single workflow for all the different types of changes? I'll be opening the poll in like a second now, and you can start voting. Perfect. So I've closed the poll for now. And I can see that most of you have answered no for the answer is equal. Some of you have answered yes and some of you have answered no. But in an ideal scenario, when approaching a change within an organization, it's always best to have unique workflows for each and every change because no change is going to be the same. So there are different types of changes as we talked about: standard, normal, and emergency changes. So when it's going to be a standard change, which you expect that to happen within the organization, for that having a generalized workflow is okay. But whenever we face an emergency change or a major change that's gonna impact the business, it's always better to have a unique workflow. So with that in mind, we'll move on to today's topic with the use case. As usual, we're going to take Zilker, a fictitious company, and how Zilker is a global health insurance firm which has offices across 3 continents, and they have their employees working from home and a lot of employees working from office and also in an hybrid environment. And now they've decided to move their entire applications from the on-premise environment to the cloud environment, enabling remote work. And that's a task, that's a major change for the IT team. And as we discussed, the Zilker, what they did was they used the normal change management strategy, which they usually apply for all the standard changes that occurs in their organization. But as opposed, moving to a cloud environment, that is moving the entire organization, the users, the applications, the Active Directory to the cloud environment, is going to be a major change that happens. Yeah. Sorry about that. I lost you for a while. Yeah. And using a normal change management strategy is not going to cut it. So we're going to see what went wrong for Zilker first and how ServiceDesk Plus Cloud could have helped them to streamline the entire process within their organization. So as we discussed, Zilker took a one-size-fits-all approach, which means the standard operating procedure. They submitted a change, and a change is created. Now, it's gone for the initial approval, where the change manager reviews the request for the change, and if everything's okay, he's going to approve it, and it's now moved on to the change owner, who's going to prepare the rollout plan, the backward plans, and the checklist, and the impact details and so on, making sure what's the impact that's for the organization. And that's exactly what Zilker did. And up until this point, it was okay. So they followed the procedure. But from cab approval is where things started getting complicated for Zilker, because they did not have a dedicated or a use case specific change advisory board to help them with the workflow. So they had their normal change advisory board to approve the request, which is going to take some time, because moving an entire organization from on-premise to cloud will involve a lot of departments, will involve a lot of stakeholders, a lot of approvals. But since they did not have that in place, it took a while. So that went on for a delay, and then they now move on to the implementation phase, where once again they did not have a proper release plan. So they try to incorporate the release within the change itself. That could work if you're trying to release a normal change. That is, once again, if you're releasing a patch for your OS server, that's an expected normal change, and you can release that within the change itself, and you can audit it. But this type of changes we are dealing with are major, and this needs a dedicated release workflow to work on. So even if there is something that's going to go wrong, we always need to have a backup plan at place. So they did not do that, which once again reflected that a poor utilization of the resources. That is, a particular change will have a lot of tasks, n number of tasks, and especially when you're dealing with a major change, you're going to have a lot of departments being assigned with specific tasks, and you need to know at any specific point of time how much load is being distributed, and is it all going along as you planned, or are you behind schedule, or are you more than within the time frame, and so on. But that did not happen for Zilka, and which in fact resulted in an haphazard manner of implementation. And they concluded that the change itself is a failure. So what happened is Zilker took a one-shot approach, tried to incorporate a major change using that single workflow, but that did not happen. So now we'll quickly see what ServiceDesk could have offered in place to have this change rolled out. So the framework what ServiceDesk offers, and we'll take this along with the use case. So in this case, Zilker had three major pain points. So one, they were not able to efficiently use their resources. They did not know which resource were used and which resource still needs to be distributed the load with, and so on. But using ServiceDesk Plus Cloud, they could have associated a project with the change management. That is, when the change comes to the particular process where you need to implement it or you need to release it, they could have created a project. And within ServiceDesk Plus offers a lot of features within the project management. That is, they could have created specific roles to make sure it's granular. Everybody is assigned with their task specific roles, and also at any point of time, using the resource management option within ServiceDesk, they could have identified where exactly they stand. Are they within the schedule, or are they running out of time, and is the load being evenly distributed? Is it something that is still in the achievable scope, and so on? So the first major pain point could have been evaded using the project management. And the second major issue that they faced was the deployment phase, where the change was okay. They created it, they submitted it, they planned it, they even got the approval. But when it came to deployment, that is implementing the change itself within the organization, that's where the issue came in. And once again, for a standard change, having a simplified workflow is going to cut it, because it's going to be the usual routine. But a major change like moving to the on-premise environment, from the on-premise to the cloud environment, involves a lot of tasks, and it needs to be done in a phased manner. And this is where our release management within ServiceDesk Plus Cloud could have helped them a lot. So in ServiceDesk, you can associate a release as well with with a change. That is, in Zilker's use case, they could have when they approached implementation, they could have first created a project, and within that a release would have been involved, and the release itself could have been divided into multiple stages and statuses to make sure it's going out in a smooth manner. And finally, the major pain point is to failing to implement the change itself. So since they did not have a proper project or a release in place, during this major change, it resulted that the implementation was a failure and they had to roll out back to the on-premise environment. So to give you a brief on what I'm talking about, the different types of changes. So usually an organization faces with three different types of changes. There could be multiple more, but usually they face three different types of changes. One being standard change, that is, as I told you, anything that happens standard or a routine which you can expect. An example being an OS patch on your servers. And a major change. A major change is something that could alter your business. It could impact your organization where this is going to be huge. You need to have proper planning. If not, there is going to be a stoppage in business. Once again, the example is the live use case we are dealing with today. Moving your entire organization from the on-premise environment to the cloud environment and infrastructure migration. And an emergency change is something that you did not anticipate. So a zero-day attack or a security patch release for a zero-day attack. So if there is some outage that has happened that you did not anticipate, and you need to do something really quick in order to make sure that the business is up and running, so that's an emergency change. So all these changes will have its unique workflows, right? So you cannot have a single predefined workflow to tackle all these different types of changes. It's practically not possible, because an emergency change you'll not know what has happened. Your problem team has to do a quick RCA to understand what has happened. Okay, so this is what has been done, and this is something that we need to quickly resolve. And once a problem has been identified and it has been resolved, and if it requires a change that needs to be implemented in the organization, you quickly raise one, and that involves a different change advisory board. You cannot wait for the entire team to approve. You'll have your own CAB or your emergency CAB team that could quickly approve and take things forward. But a standard change is something that you can expect. Your team will already know that they're expecting an approval at the end of a quarter, or a yearly or half yearly. So that's something you'll have a different workflow. You'll know what you can expect. But a major change is something that involves a lot of planning. So we'll now see how Zilker could have tackled this major change using ServiceDesk Plus Cloud in a phased manner. So as you can see, the first three processes are perfect. They submit a change, and once it's submitted, all the relevant details are entered. And from there, they are going to start planning the stage of the change itself. So they are going to put in the rollout plan, the backout plan, and the impact details, the checklist that needs to be made sure that everything is it's in place. And then comes the approval. And in the first place, Zilker did not have a proper CAB board, but with using ServiceDesk Cloud, you can create multiple change advisory boards, dedicated for each and every type of changes within the organization, and that's that. So once you have approached the approval stage and you now have all the approvals, so now comes the implementation or the release stage. So this is where ServiceDesk Cloud could have offered them project management. So you create a project dedicated for this release, and you assign project members all across from your organization with all the departments. And within the project, you create milestones for each and every department to complete. And within each milestones, you can have n number of tasks to make sure everything is completed in an orderly fashion. Everything is dependent on each other, right? So you cannot have one department completing its target, but while because since you're moving all the applications at one time into the cloud environment, you need to make sure that every department has completed their task. And from that point, and also the features available within the module itself, as I told you, the Gantt chart to know where exactly you stand with the milestones, your tasks, your projects, the resource management to know how effectively you're using the resources within the organization, and also the work logs and timesheets, and a lot more options, which you can see in a couple of minutes. I'll take you live to the application, and I'll show you around. And yeah, so once they've determined the project, once the team has started working, once they've completed all their tasks, and now they're actually ready for a release, now ServiceDesk Cloud could have offered them in creating a release for this, because as I told you, this is a major change, major release, and it would have its own stages. You cannot expect to release this in one go, because let's say you're releasing, and for some reason that's some issue. You cannot have all the users facing this. The business is going to be down. In that case, you are going to plan a phased release manner, and for that you could have used the release management. You would have planned how you're going to do it, how it's been developed, and what sort of testing has been gone through with a group of test users. And then comes the UAT, where the user acceptance testing, where you dedicatedly bring in a group of users to test out if there is something that is working out, if there is something that can be brought in for the wider phase of manner, and so on. And then comes the deployment. So once the UAT is complete, once you have confidence that it's working, then you would have deployed it. And once it is deployed, then a quick review on how it's happening. So it's now deployed, it's now live. You would have taken a quick review on where you stand, and then you would have closed the release itself. So from this point, you go back to the change management to have a post implementation review. So we have already split up the entire process into multiple smaller tasks, but since the change itself is not closed, you still have the change open to have a post implementation review to see if everything is going as planned. And from that point, if you're satisfied, you could have closed the change with a closure code, preferably, to know at the end of an audit period what happened to the change, if it was something that was executed successfully, or if you have canceled it. So with that, I'll take you right into the application. Right. So this is the change module within ServiceDesk Plus Cloud. So you can see this is the list view, and I already have a change created here for moving the on-premise application to the cloud environment. So this particular page is going to tell you exactly what you want to know, where exactly you stand with the change, and all the relevant details. To the left-hand side, you see all the stages involved for this particular change. You submit it, you plan it, you send out approvals for the CAB evaluation team, and then comes the implementation, and finally you release the change itself, and you close it. To the right, you have other relevant details, such as the change, who's the owner of the change, who's the change manager, and what's the approval status, where exactly you stand, and all the associations, which we will talk about in a while. So what is available under each and every stage? So when you're submitting, you have a lot of fields that needs to be put in. You need to gather a lot of information before submitting a change, so that your change manager can review it and send it out to the planning team and to have that executed. So on the change details page, you have what risk is involved, what is the priority, and what is going to be the impact, the urgency, what are all the assets that is going to get affected, the CIs, the services, and so on. And as I told you, you can segregate roles on all the aspects, for changes, for projects, and as well as for the release. So you define what roles needs to apply for this particular change, and who is going to be the change role user, who's going to perform all these tasks, and so on. So once you submit the change, you then move on to planning, where in planning you have the impact details. You put in what's going to be the rollout plan, and you can enter what's going to be the backout plan, the checklist, and so on. And once everything is fine, you then move on to the CAB evaluation stage. I'll show you how you can configure all these in a while. So I'll show you how to create these templates, how to add these fields, how you can move from one stage to another, and how this is all happening in the background, what workflow is working, and everything. I'm just giving you first a quick overview on how the change how the change looks within the application itself. So Zilker has now migrated, and it's now completed the planning stage, and it's now moving on to the CAB evaluation. So they have a couple of approvals that needs to be sent, and so since it's in green color, you can know that we have 3 levels of approval, and each approval level has its own approvers. And once they've approved, it'll show them in a green color. If it's rejected, you'll see it in a red color, and if it's pending, you'll see that in an orange colored tab. And once that's done, once you get all the approvals, and it's not that you can only send out approvals on the cab evaluation stage. As I told you, at any point of time, so this is how the beneficial it can be for you to have your own unique workflow. At any stage you can trigger an approval, and that's all shown here under the approvals tab. And that's not just for the cab evaluation stage. If you have one for submission, if you have one for planning, everything will be shown here. And once it's recorded, you can have that seen under the approvals tab. So once you get the cab evaluation approvals from the dedicated teams, you then move on to implementation, where this is where Zilker has created a project in order to have that done in a phased manner. So you can see under associations, they have created a project, and let me quickly open that for you. So you can have a quick overview on what's happening, and if needed, you can create them, open them in a new tab to have the entire details. So as I told you, using project management, you could have implemented this entire change into multiple, you could have created that into multiple milestones, and within each milestone you could have created multiple tasks, assigned it to the particular group and task owners, making sure that they complete it, and where exactly you stand, and then you move on to the release procedure. So that's exactly what Zilker has done, where they created a project, and they have given a project owner, and under that they have created multiple milestones on what needs to be done at each and every stage. And under each milestones you can have multiple tasks, and these tasks can be allocated to the required owner. And once that's done, you can see on the top right, I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So on the top right, you have the resource management option, where you'll know how much load is being distributed among your users, and where exactly do they stand. Is it something that is within the scheduled time, or are you approaching, are you going overtime, and so on. Just a moment. Sorry about that. Yeah. And you have the Gantt chart here. So the Gantt chart is what we talked about earlier, where you have, it's not that you only have one particular project that's going on in the application. Each project will have its own milestones, and each milestone will have its own task, and everything can be can be viewed in a bird's eye view, or where exactly you stand and what's the timeline you're approaching, and so on. And you can enter each, and timesheets can be entered for each and every task, so that you'll know how much effort has been put into each and every milestone, each and every task, so that at the end of an audit period, you'll know this particular change has consumed this much effort, and where exactly did it actually go out of the way, or was that a successful implementation. So Zilker did exactly that. And under association, you can see that the project has one change associated from where this project itself was created. And we have now, the team has now completed all the milestone, all the tasks, and now it's time for them to actually do the deployment and come up with the implementation itself. So if it's a standard change, if it's a normal emergency change, they could have just directly used the release module in the change itself. To the left, you have the release module. If it's a very standard, a very small change, you can use the release module. But since this is a major change and involves a lot of planning, Zilker created a dedicated release for the change itself. Let me quickly open that. And as you can see, in ServiceDesk Plus Cloud, change and release is almost similar. So you have almost the same templates. The automations works almost similarly, but you have different fields and stages compared to the change itself, as both are different processes. So similarly, you can see the change and the release are almost similar. You have all the stages to the left, and each stage will have its own fields, and the planning is almost similar, and the development, and the major important part, how is this all happening in the background. So as I told you, everything is configured, and the entire workflow moves as you configure on the admin level. So you can see the workflow option on the top that says, yeah, just click on that, and you can see how they have configured this entire workflow to successfully implement the on-premise movement to the cloud environment. So this is a complex workflow because this is a major change, but you can create this as and has now required, based on if it's an emergency change, you can skip a lot of stages. You can only have a couple of approvals here and there. Make sure every stakeholders are notified that the change is happening, and directly you can close it. If it's a standard change, as usual, you can reuse the release within the application, within the change itself, so that it's a standard release which you expect, and you can do that. But in this case, we're going to see a complex workflow where from submission until closure, there are a lot of automations involved. I'll show you how this is created on the back end, how you can do that on an admin level. But to quickly have an overview here, you can see a change is submitted, and the first check that you see is if a change, what type of change, what risk does it involve. If it's a high risk involved change, go ahead, have a couple of approvals. If it's a medium change, have just send a notification, update that it's a medium change, and just go to the approved status for planning. And if it's a low change, you don't need to have any sort of an approval. You can directly take it to the planning stage. Likewise, you can have approvals, notifications, tasks, field updates that can be done at any stage. And I'll show it to you in a while how you can configure them. And even the templates itself is configurable. So to coming back, Zilker completed the release, and I'll just quickly show you. So in this release workflow, they're currently in development in progress. So if they complete it, they go to testing, and that triggers an approval. And from that point, they deploy it, they train, and they close it. So you just go to the right, and you can just go to the completed status. Okay, development is complete. And you can now see it's now turned into a green color, indicating that we have now completed development. And if I quickly refresh the screen, if I go into the workflow, I can see now it's in the development stage, and it's now going to cross to testing. And likewise, once each and every stage is complete, so that's going to trigger an approval, because you can see if I say that it's completed, I want an approval to be triggered, and only if the approval is approved, I want to move to the deployment stage. So that's what is exactly is happening. So I have now an approval, so I'm gonna approve it here. So you can see, as I told you, you can see all the records here on when did you approve, who approved it, to whom it's still pending, and so on. So since I've approved it, since there is no more nodes involved, the testing itself, the deployment itself is completed. The entire change has now come to an end. It has closed itself. So the entire history is available on what happened and who performed, and what notifications were sent at which point of time, and everything is automated. And now this is how Zilker created a change, and they submitted it, they planned it, they sent it for approval, and when it came to implementation, they created a project, and the project was divided into multiple milestones, and each milestone had its own task and its own project members. And then once everybody has has completed their task, they created a release to make sure the release itself was done in a phased manner. And once again, that involved a lot of stages where you have the predefined workflows that's happening in the background, the approvals, the notifications. And once the change itself is, the release itself is closed, they come back here, and they have now, they can they can just say that the release is completed. So they're currently on implementation, and if it's now completed, they can go ahead and close the change itself. So go back here, and just refresh it. So it'll take a while. So it should go into review in progress. Okay, the approval is kicked in. I've got the notification, and okay, I just need to go ahead and approve it. So I'm going to say that it's approved. And now if I go back to the change from release, it should have now gone into review. And likewise from review, if I say that it's closed, I can go ahead and this is the closure code. I can say that the it's a success, and that the change itself comes to a close. You can see that from submission until close. So where do you configure all these items in the application? For that, you go into setup, and under setup, under customization, we'll first see how change management works. So you go into change management, and everything here is customizable. So earlier we talked about the change type. Now how what type of change are we dealing with? Is it a significant? Is it a standard change, or is it a major change, or an emergency change? We can just go ahead, create one based on the terminologies you use within the organization. And what does that mean by pre-approval? So you see something called a green colored icon right next to the standard change, which means these are pre-approved change, and this does not involve an approval process. As I told you, you can the changes that happens time and again within the organization does not need approvals to be triggered every single time. And when you use a predefined pre-approved standard change, which is not standard in this case, it's standard, it can be anything, just make sure you enable the pre-approval for that. So what happens is, I'll quickly show you an example as well. So if you can see here, the change number 7, so you can see it's approved already because I've used a standard change to raise this particular ticket, and it's a pre-approved one, and you can see the icon right next to it. So likewise, you can create your own type of changes, and the CAB. So the change advisory boards, once again, can be, you can create any number of CABs within the organization, and each one can have its own specific use cases, and it can be multiple team members as well. And you can choose how many other members that you have within the organization, give them a name, and you can incorporate them into the workflow, which I'll show you. The workflow is the integral part on how the change itself works, or how the release itself works. So these all comes into place inside the workflow, which we just saw, the map which we just saw on how a change needs to progress from the start until end. Likewise, change risk is once again another field which you use in the template, and reason for change is again, these are predefined ones that comes with the application, but you can go ahead, delete them out, create your own ones in the application. And closure code is going to help you to know how exactly the change was closed. Was that something that was canceled and you closed it? Was it something that was rejected and you closed it? Or if it was completed, and so on. And finally, the stage and statuses. We saw a couple of stages on this particular change, where from submission until close, and this particular major change did not have UAT because we did that on the release management itself. But as I told you earlier, if it's a normal change or a standard change, and you want to do the release within the change itself, because it's something very very small, and it does not take much much assistance. In that case, you can make use of the UAT stage and release stage, have the statuses inside it. Each and every stage will have its own statuses, and every status will you can have it predefined, who needs to be notified, what are all the details that needs to be sent, so that when a change moves from one stage to another, automatically these notifications are triggered with all the relevant details, so that the owner or the change manager for that particular stage, or the entire change itself, will be aware. Instead of coming into the application, opening it at the go, they'll know what is happening, and they can take actions. And finally, the change role. So this is a very major part in the change itself, because you can segregate each and every change with you can create multiple roles and assign it to each and every individual technicians and requesters, making sure that they do their part, which in fact moves the change forward. A change manager is the highest level in the organization, who has access to anything, all the stages, all the statuses, and can even approve at a emergency situation where your change advisory board isn't available, and if you want your manager to go ahead with the approval, a change manager can do it. No other role can perform this. So the change manager can only be a technician, and they need to have the SD change manager role assigned to them. A change owner can should also be a technician, but they will not have access to the cab evaluation stage. As I told you, only the CAB team can approve a change, and if not, in a very unlikely scenario, if the CAB team isn't available, only a change manager can go ahead and surpass the approval process. And likewise, you can create these. Once again, these are the predefined roles that comes with the application, but you can go ahead, create your own roles, assign it with whatever permissions you want to give that particular user, and it can be both requester and technician. That's one advantage. Let's take, for example, if you create a role called implementer, and you give them only permissions to edit or approve in the implementation stage, which means that particular user cannot even change any fields within the change unless or until the particular change comes to the implementation stage. So once you define that, once you go ahead, you define everything on an admin level, you can go ahead and start creating the change template. So under setup, templates and forms, change template, you open the major change template. And within that, the fields which we talked about earlier, the change risk and every other fields like priority, the impact, urgency, they all come in. And it's not that you need to use these predefined fields as usual as you do for the ticketing module in the application. You can create your new fields. You can just drag and drop. It can be any type of field. You can just give it a name, and that can be mandated and so on. And then you can define the change role. So once again, you can create n number of roles. Let's say you create around 15 to 20 different roles, and it's not that every role needs to be applied for every single change, right? So this is a major change, and this will only involve an approver, a reviewer, a UAT owner, a line manager, and an implementer. But another role, another change, a standard change, or an emergency change will have another unique role which only applies for that particular template, and you can create them as needed. And task. So whenever a change is created, so if someone uses this particular template to create a change, do you want certain tasks to be triggered automatically and to be assigned to a particular group or a user? Yes, it can be done. And this is once again done on the background. And these can be further enhanced on the workflow, which I'll get to in a moment. But this is once again a pretty straightforward way to make sure that a change has been assigned with a task when created using the particular template. And finally, the form rules, which is going to help you perform a lot of automation. So whenever you have someone creating the change request, let it be a requester or a technician, the form itself will have a lot of fields. And the straightforward option is to click on the gear icon, and you can mandate a lot of fields in the change template. But if you need something very specific based on user selection, for example, let's take this one for example. If someone chooses change risk, which is not high, I don't want to mandate these fields, these asset involved or CI involved, because I don't want to know, because since it's not a high risk change, even though a couple of assets are affected, that's not going to make much of an impact. So I don't want these to be mandated field. I don't want my technicians to enter these values, because there could be a scenario where even no assets are affected, but a change is required. So likewise, you can create a rule to mandate a field, to unmandate, to show a field, to hide a field. You can remove certain options from a field. For example, if the priority is high, the change risk can only be high. You can just remove low, medium, and very low as options. So likewise, you can do a lot of automations while the template is being used by your end user, and that can be segregated based on form load, or do you want to just have this actioned when when a particular field is changed, or it needs to be reflected once they click on submit and the form is submitted for action. Finally, you have the additional settings for the change template, where do you want your requesters to create changes? So if yes, you need to check mark on this particular template. And once again, if you need to restrict it based on user groups and you don't want to show this to all the requesters, you can do that. And how the trigger task needs to be working in the application. Is it when you change from one stage to another, or do you want as ticketing, as you do in the ticketing module, do you want to manually trigger a task, and so on. So once you go ahead and create your specific change template, and this can be multiple templates based on your requirement, so then you go ahead and you start creating the workflows. So we saw the workflow here for the major change, where it started from submission until closure, and at each and every stage there were a lot of automatic triggers, automatic approvals, and so on. So we'll see how we can create that. So this is the change workflow which we saw a couple of minutes earlier. So this involves around 7 stages, and once it's submitted and once it's accepted, it's going to check a switch is put in place that's going to check what type of change risk is being assigned to this. Just give me a minute. Sorry about that. Yeah. So based on the selection of the user. So if someone is choosing that the or not, I mean, even after creating the change, your change owner or your change manager opens the change and deems that okay, this change is a high risk change. In that case, what needs to happen? So here we have created a node that's we have created a fork, which means we are splitting it into 2 different parts. One, we are sending it for an approval, and you can have a number of approvals. As I told you, you just drag and drop the approval nodes from the right. You have a lot of options here. So starting with stages, you have the conditions, where the switch is what we're dealing with right now, which is to have multiple checks for one single field. So an example being change risk will have a lot of options within them, and for each option, if each option is selected, you can have a different path to take the change. But if you put in an if condition, it's just an yes or no. So if change risk is high, if it's yes, do this. If it's a no, do that, and so on. Wait for is the timer action. So we have involved that a couple of steps down. I'll get to that. So we'll just quickly see what are all the action nodes. So here we have involved the timer action, and we have also involved the notification action and the field update and the approval. So notification is being sent to a couple of users with the content which is customizable completely, and you just drag and drop wherever you want it, and from which node does it need to come out from. And you also have just if it's a medium change, send a notification and update the stakeholder field. So you have a field that is being chosen, stakeholder update status, and you want that to be updated as acknowledged. And if not, if it's a high risk change, you have forked it, which means you have created 2 different forks, one being a timer, and for each level you want to send out an approval reminder notification to all these users, making sure that they approve it so that it surpasses the current stage. Just a moment. Yeah, coming back. So the approval node is done, and once it's approved, you take it back to planning. And in planning stage, you want a particular task to be triggered if it's planning in progress. That is add rollout and backout plan. So you put that as a task, you put it to the owner Sarah, you put it to a particular group, and that is automatically triggered. So once it's coming, once submission is triggered, and let's assume it's a high risk change, and once the approval is sent out and the user has approved, it's going to automatically go to the planning stage, planning in progress, and the workflow is going to make sure that it's going to roll out a task to Sarah to put in the backout plan and the rollout plan. So here we have incorporated a timer. So this is where the condition node comes in. The timer is make sure that the rollout plan and the backout plan is done. So it's not empty, it's not empty. So once both are entered, the timer is going to, it's going to get skipped, and it's going to make sure that the planning is approved. And from planning, you're going to, kick off the approvals for the CAB evaluation stage, where we have a lot of if conditions. If the priority is high, you send out a fork again, you send it to two different approval teams. If the applications is okay, so we have created a custom field. If the application is chosen as a database or framework, you send out a different approval to the apps approval team. If the stakeholder is the particular team member, send it out to a different person. And based on all these answers, it's going to go to this stage for the implementation. And as usual, you can just go ahead, have multiple stages, create nodes, create multiple actions, and you can complete the entire workflow. So creating a workflow is very simple, where you just create a particular workflow. Yeah. So by default, you need to have the submission and the closure stage. You have to submit a change, you have to close it. But other stages are, once again, depends on your use case. So in this case, if you only want planning, and inside planning, you don't want to complicate much, you only want to have approved, planning in progress, rejected, you can just have them there. And you can say, so once the submission is accepted, take me to the planning in progress stage. And here have if condition, if the priority is high. I'm going to say if the priority is high, so this is yes, I want to send out an approval. So an approval is sent. I'm going to choose a couple of change owners and so on, and this is the content. So if it's high, go to this approval. If only if it is approved, say that the planning is approved. If it is denied, go ahead and directly cancel the change itself. So likewise, you can just have a very basic change, and this is the, I mean, I can add more stages here. Incorporate directly. You can incorporate implementation. So what exactly is happening, and for each and every stage, you can have your own approvals. Your actions, like updating fields, adding tasks. Even you can call your third-party applications using webhooks. Even that is possible. Or you can trigger a custom function if you have a very specific requirement which you feel is not directly achievable in the application. Our team can help you with it. So this is how you create a change workflow. And a release workflow is very similar. As I told you earlier, change and release are completely similar within the application. It's just that if there is a major release, even that has a lot of planning, a lot of stages, a lot of customization that needs to be done, so that we separate the process into two different things. So for that, you can just go into customization and release management. You'll have the same stage and status, the release role, the downtime type, and so on. You can just create that and come back to workflows again, change, put it to release. And we were already using this release there, where we had an approval. If the risk detection was high, it triggered an approval to me. We approved it. Then it came into development, testing, deployment, training, and closure, and so on. So you can have as complicated or as complex as you want based on how big the change is, or you can have a very minimal workflow, making sure that there is very less manual intervention for a change to move from submission until closure. So, and finally, to quickly have a look on the project management. So this is where you create the project roles. So similarly, you created a role for a release, for change. You can also create a role for projects as well, where you can say to which particular options do these people have permissions to. Do they have an entire control over the project, or only to the milestones, or only to the task? And what sort of permissions within that they can they edit, can they delete, and what are all the projects are they allowed to view? So is it all the projects or associated projects, and so on, which is pretty straightforward, as you see. And you have to make sure, I told you two things earlier. One, if you want to assign anybody as a change manager, make sure that you give them the SD change manager role. So the SD change manager role needs to be given. And if you're going to choose a project role, you need to make sure on the technicians, you have to choose the role which you have created or that comes within the application itself. So with that, we are nearing to the end of today's presentation. We'll have a quick recap on what we saw, on what are all the features and functionalities we discussed today. So we saw what are all the different types of changes that an organization usually faces and how you can configure them within the application, and how you can create unique templates, workflows, and roles to match these to tackle these type of changes inside the organization, and how various stages within the change is approached in the application, and how you can set up automations to make sure there is very minimal intervention to move a particular change from submission until closure, and that's the same for release as well, and how you can have dedicated change advisory boards and approvers for each stage, as well as your change advisory stage within the change itself, and how you can have them unique for each and every type of change. And finally, how we saw how to associate a project and a release within the change to make sure a complex change like moving from an on-premise environment to the cloud environment is successfully implemented within the organization. Thank you so much, guys. You guys have been a wonderful audience, and I hope this session was informative. And if you guys need any specific requirements or any specific queries that you need to have them addressed, drop an email to us at my email address or at hello@ServiceDesk Plus, or a support email, and the team will be happy to connect with you. Thank you all, and have a great day.